Hello and welcome to Unleashed, the show that explores how to thrive as an independent professional. I'm your host, Will Bachman, and I'm here today with McKinsey alum Nicolai, Chen, Nielsen. Nicolai, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Will. Great to be on it.
So, Nicolai, I was so excited to speak with you because you have this range of things I want to explore and hear about the various different facets that you have going on. So, you're the author of 3 books, and we could talk about those. And you recently left your role at Workday and set up your own practice. You're the author of Leadership at Scale, which better leadership and better results, that you wrote while at McKinsey, along with Michael Rennie and Claudio Fezer. And then you're also written Return on Ambition, which a radical approach to your achievement, growth, and well-being. So, and you've got another one coming out as well, another book. So let's start with Return on Ambition. I'd love to hear a bit about your thoughts around that. Sometimes ambition is almost considered a negative. People don't want to admit they're ambitious, but tell me, what's your thoughts on ambition?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit it on the head. It's sometimes, let's say, misunderstood, and there's a lot of different perceptions of ambition. And Return on Ambition took probably 5, almost 6 years to write, and was very much both a personal journey, but also something that I noticed that I was not just the only one struggling with my ambition, but actually also a lot of my peers, both in McKinsey and outside, were struggling with ambition. And specifically, we were all working hard. We were all doing what we thought was the best thing to not just get ahead, but also live a good life. But many of us were struggling. I was personally struggling. I wasn't feeling fulfilled, and I kept asking myself, "Is my ambition actually serving me, or is it getting in the way?" So that was a bit the context for writing it. And then, long story short, I wrote it with Nicolai, my co-author, and we had an idea about bringing some of these coaching tools that we were fortunate to have access to, bringing those to a wider audience, and then it resulted in this book.
Okay, so talk to me about some of those coaching tools.
Yeah, I mean, we focus on ambition because we actually found that it is not very well understood, and there aren't really any books out there that focus specifically on you as an ambitious person, and how can you manage your ambition better. So one of the key concepts we focus on is this notion of a return on ambition, which is meant to be a bit provocative, like return on assets. But what we're saying is your ambition is often your biggest investment in life if you're ambitious, in terms of the time you spend pursuing it, your resources, your energy, maybe your money. How actively do you actually measure the return, and how actively do you actually manage that return? So one tool specifically, which is part 1 of the book, is a self-assessment, which helps the reader map out their returns across 3 areas of the life, in terms of their achievement, in terms of their growth, in terms of their well-being. And we're not saying higher or lower on one or the other is better or worse. What we're helping you do is just figure out, am I happy with this return? And if not, how might I adjust what I'm doing?
Okay, let's define terms. What do we mean by ambition? How is it different from a goal or a career? So give me as fine a definition as as to distinguish it from some of these other kind of concepts of just something that you would aspire to, or just any kind of goal in life. How do you define ambition?
Yeah, we define it in the book. Let's see if I can remember it, word by word. We spent a lot of time crafting this definition. It's something along the line of, your ambition is a strong yearning and drive to reach a future state that's different from today, challenging to reach, and personally meaningful. And this is purposefully done quite broadly. So we talk about, it's first of all this yearning and drive, right? You have an innate desire to get somewhere, and it's a future state that's different. So it has to be different, and it has to be challenging to reach. So you might argue that for some people, graduating from university is not very ambitious, while for others that might be very ambitious. It depends on your context. But this future state has to be different from today, has to be challenging to reach. And then we add it in, and it has to be personally meaningful, because you might have a lot of goals set by others, which you are either compelled to do, or it's part of your professional job requirements. But if it's not personally meaningful, then it is, we would look at it in a different way. So that's how we define ambition. And just to comment on what you mentioned at the beginning, it's not, it could be about your career, but not necessarily. It could be about professional goals, not necessarily. The future state that you aspire towards can be literally anything that is meaningful for you.
Yeah, I noticed that when you gave me your definition. So this could include, you know, uh, wanting to be a good father, or wanting to get in some sort of physical condition, or become a chess master, or some other thing that's not necessarily directly related to your career.
Absolutely.
And having thought about this for 5 years, what are some of your insights on what counts as a good ambition, and ones that might have a high return, and what potential ambitions might people have that on deeper reflection are not serving them well?
Yeah, we studied a lot of ambitious people. We interviewed hundreds of ambitious people, and there definitely were some common patterns that emerged. So I wouldn't say we try not to characterize, good or bad ambition in the, let's say, strictest sense of the term. As long as you're not hurting others, you could argue, then there isn't really for us to say what you're doing is good or bad. But a couple of nuances there. So one is, it needs to be a true ambition, true to you. We find that people often can be a bit blindsided by societal expectations, or um, their own desire to prove other people wrong, and they end up pursuing a direction which actually isn't true for you. So that's one leg of the argument, that your ambition, the direction that might not be serving you, is one that ultimately isn't the right direction. And then secondly, and to get a bit more specific, I talked about that self-assessment that we have in the book, and those three pillars, the tripod of achievement, growth, and well-being, across the board, when we looked at people who were what they would say having a high return on ambition, feeling fulfilled and successful in life, they had a balance between their achievement, their growth, and well-being. Um, Short-term imbalances might arise once in a while, but in the medium term, long term, you absolutely have a balance, and you absolutely are managing these three elements: achievement, growth, and well-being, on a consistent basis.
Let's talk about each of those elements in turn just a little bit. Dive
Yeah.
dive in, and tell me what you mean by each one, and how would you assess it. So achievement, talked about that one a bit.
Yeah, achievement is probably the one people gravitate towards first when we think about ambition. Often we equate it to professional growth or professional goals. Achievement for me and for us is a bit broader. So it's about anything where you feel a sense of accomplishment, anything where you're pushed to do something, achieve something meaningful. Typically, they are self-set, so goals that you set yourself. Typically, they combine both short-term and long-term aspirations in the future. So if you have that, you having this notion, having a sense that you are achieving, you're fulfilling things that are typically a bit challenging for you. Conversely, you have some people who actually feel high degree of well-being, actually maybe a high degree of development and growth. Maybe that's someone at university, but they feel like, look, I'm actually lacking on this achievement. Like, I want to get out there, I want to do something. I have aspiration and goals that I'm not yet able to really get in on.
How should people think about assessing their own well-being? So what are we talking about here? Sort of sleep, diet, fitness, personal relationships, friends, family. Like what are the elements that go into well-being?
Yeah, at a meta level, I would use some of the things that you just mentioned. So there's four buckets. You can talk about physical well-being, mental well-being, emotional well-being, and spiritual well-being, or well-being linked to purpose and values. Those would be the four, I would say, that cover the vast majority. So physical well-being is sleep, it is nutrition, it is being physically healthy. That's super important. Mental well-being is not being overworked, not being stressed, being able to focus on one thing at a time. Emotional well-being then gets into, for example, relationships with others, having a social circle, feeling valued, feeling cared for. And then the spiritual well-being, or the purpose-driven well-being, is linked to you feeling like you're doing what you're meant to be doing and living the life that you're meant to be living.
And what about growth? So why is that so important? What are some examples of how you could assess your own growth?
Yeah, growth is the part of the tripod which isn't in what people talk about work-life balance. And we can talk about that. I think work-life balance is a very, very bad dichotomy, because there's much more to life than work and life. That's why we have achievement and not work, because you could be having a job that maybe isn't fulfilling, and that's the situation for many people, but you could still have a high degree of achievement because you're doing things outside of work, or you can somehow shape your work context to still have a notion of achievement. So, small sidebar, I'm not a fan of work-life balance because of the way it's structured. And another reason is it doesn't have growth. And growth is, when you look at the literature, when you look at the neuroscience, people who don't have growth, that's why it's one of the three legs of the tripod. If you don't have growth, it doesn't matter how much you're achieving or how good your well-being is. At some point in time, you will feel comfortable and routine will set in, and you'll feel a yearning for more. Conversely, if we take consulting, it is a challenging environment, but people feel like they're growing extremely quickly, which is why at a holistically, it's enjoyable to be there. So growth is really interesting, because when it's not there, you get bored, and when it is there, you can actually put up with very tough environments, for example.
Yeah, I'm also not a big fan of kind of the term work-life balance. There's this quote, the master in the art of living makes little distinction between their work and their play. And so, in terms of growth, Tyler Cowen has this question that he asked, it's in his book, Talent, about what do you do that's equivalent to a pianist practicing scales, right? In terms of practicing to intentionally get better at whatever it is you do. So I'm curious if you had sort of insights or thoughts around that, about people who are very intentional about trying to improve on some certain area, and not just kind of going through the motions of their work, but trying to think about, what are the areas I want to improve on? How could I do that? What do I practice to get better at those things?
Yeah, that is, it's a good question, because growth is often not done very deliberately. There is a term called deliberate development. And that's one of the things we talk about, because you will grow if you're stretched outside your comfort zone, yes, but then you'll pretty quickly hit a wall. And what high achievers, what the pianist does, what the Olympic champion does, is that they are constantly recreating new boundaries or stretching the boundaries of their comfort zone. They're constantly being pushed just outside. They're being very deliberate about their development. So if we take a pianist and they're playing a scale, they will be very critical about what they do well and what's the one thing that they need to improve on in that specific session. In the next 20 minutes, I'm going to practice X, as opposed to just playing. You need both. Sometimes you just want to play and enjoy it, but you also need to have that very specific thing that you want to improve on. I'm not a pianist, but I can give other examples in sports, or I hobby DJ, for example, and DJing is actually very technical, and sometimes I just play and put different tracks together, and it's a lot of fun. But I actually find that doesn't improve me very well. It improves me up until a point, then I hit a plateau. And to actually break through the plateau, I need to say a specific thing, a specific transition, a specific time that I want to focus on, and literally do it 10 times in a row. It's pretty boring, actually, but that's how you break through it.
So being a DJ is not so much just straightforward pick with a song list. Tell me a bit more about that thing you do on the side. What is challenging about being a DJ? Is it kind of sensing the crowd and figuring out what's going to, be the right transition to the next song, or say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and DJing was something I picked up during COVID, beginning of COVID, probably 2.5 years ago. It was always a lifelong dream, aspiration I wanted to get into, never quite got into it. And then I just took the plunge and started about 2.5 years ago. And I learned that it's an art and a science. So there is a science behind music structure and timing and understanding when and where to mix in various songs, what works well, what doesn't, the keys of the song, and so forth. And you have to get to a foundational level of mixing technique. But then beyond that, it's actually less important. That's, all DJs who can DJ a party, they have the foundations in place. What then makes you a good versus great DJ is more the art. You need to know your songs in your library. You need to understand the people on the dance floor in front of you. And then in the moment, you need to be very adaptive and have a sense of what's going to work well, what doesn't, because sometimes you're just going, killer song after killer song and the dance floor is reacting. And then sometimes you put a song and then the energy just drops and you need to very quickly get out of that and go into a new song. So it's definitely a bit of that art and science.
Let's expand out a bit here. We've been talking about one of the books you've written, but give us now an overview of what you have going on. You recently set up your independent consulting practice. You give keynote talks, you writing books. Give us an overview of your practice and how you envision it developing.
Yeah, I would definitely say I'm ambitious, so doing many different things at the same time, and always focusing on always trying to focus on what's going to be most important for me. So right now, I'm focusing on a number of different things. One is building my practice. I do a lot of work within leadership development for organizations, anything around behavior change at scale, culture change, and I'm also super passionate about anything around the future of work and organizations of the future. And that's a bit of a white space. There's a lot of stuff written about it, but it's also a bit of a moving target where we haven't quite defined, what's going to be the winning or the most effective organizational model in the future. So setting my practice right now is both doing client work, but also just engaging with a lot of clients and trying to understand what are their organization related challenges, especially in today's environment. All companies are struggling with attrition or retaining their best people. All companies are struggling with, do we go virtual? Do we go hybrid? How do we actually make it work? Some of these very real, quite future-oriented questions. Companies are dabbling in Metaverse or some kind of virtual office space. I find that really interesting because that is the direction companies need to go. So it's not a question of should we get on that train? It's more a question of how do we do it? So that's building my practice, working, serving clients, and then speaking with just a ton of different companies about their organizational related challenges. Secondly, I love thought leadership. The two books were written not because I like writing, but it wasn't for the sake of writing. I wrote the books because I had these big questions in mind, and writing is a way to organize my thoughts and learn. I learned a ton of things by writing the books. My third book, From Malthus to Mars, is coming out in Danish shortly, and then in English in about early next year. And that's about future trends and future organization. So I do like to spend time on researching and publishing things and writing books. And then you could say as a spin-off to that, keynotes and doing workshops is something I also really enjoy because it is really about pushing the thinking of the audience and how can I serve them and help them see the world, see themselves in new ways. So those would be the main things professionally.
Tell me your thoughts around the metaverse and setting up offices in the metaverse. What have you seen so far, and what are you anticipating might happen there?
Well, at an overarching level, I do really believe in the metaverse. We don't know exactly how it's going to play out and how exactly the technology is going to look, and do we wear wearables, or is it going to be on our phone that projects something, or is there going to be a contact lens that's smart? But for me, the parallel is, we're spending hours a day on our phones as a medium to interact with people. Many people spend time on Facebook, on Instagram, and so forth, other social networks. So that's just us having a identity in cyberspace that we can shape and manage, and we can have interactions with people that are both our friends, but also people that we've never met before. All that for me is going to transition at some point to the metaverse because it's simply more engaging. Right now, the technology is not where it needs to be, but that's at least a direction. So I don't see us spending 3 hours on our phone a day on social media in the future. I see us spending 3 hours in the metaverse and still doing the same thing, right? I will have an avatar. I will be going to the leadership interest group, or I'll just be interacting with my friends. But it'll be way more realistic, way more fun, way more engaging than just looking at a 7-inch screen. So that's on the metaverse in terms of direction. What I've seen today is some stuff is pretty cool about how companies are using not yet the metaverse, but they're using virtual office spaces, and it's surprisingly fun to use. So instead of being, let's say, just on Zoom and everyone is working in virtual teams, there are platforms out there. Gather is one platform where you set up a virtual office space. It's like a 2D computer game that kind of looks like Pac-Man, a little bit nicer graphics, but you set up an office on the screen. So they have the marketing department with people having a physical desk. You have some snack rooms, you have a kitchen, you have the finance department, you have meeting rooms and so forth. And I was surprised how important and how big of a difference it made for me. For example, when I was able to move my avatar on the screen, I could walk from my desk to the marketing manager's desk and actually start a conversation. And it's just like you would do in a real office, and you're still only doing it on what's the equivalent of Zoom or Microsoft Teams. But the fact that I could see my avatar and I could walk around and I could have these, let's say, casual conversations made a tremendous difference to this notion of working in a virtual environment.
Oh, that sounds very interesting. And so how does that work? So paint a picture for us. You're moving this avatar on the screen, and then does basically a Zoom pop up where you talk to the marketing director, or do we have sort of goggles on so that we're seeing a virtual office and like an avatar of the other person? What's the experience like currently?
Yeah, right now it's the interface for interacting is still a Zoom-like experience. It's a video pop-up. What's nice is that you're getting a sense of togetherness, that I can see myself in the office, that I can see everyone else on that virtual office. It looks just like a computer game. I can of course choose to go to the let's say relaxation or the lounge or the kitchen. So which means I'm more liable to bump into people and just literally trigger a conversation. The technology was actually extremely smooth. So the moment that you go to someone, they can then choose to either accept the invitation very quickly, and then the screen immediately popped up. So there was zero waiting time. It can literally be, hey, I have a question about that marketing report. So it actually mimicked real life much better than I would have thought. And I can see when everyone's online where they are. I can also choose to leave the office if I have a commitment. So you get a sense that you know where your coworkers are, and you can be in this together.
So that kind of gives that more sense of togetherness while people are still, working remotely. I think the real Zoom can be a bit tiring being on, and just, I don't know what it is exactly, like looking at the screen, having to kind of smile or appear alert for long periods of time. But,
Yeah.
And also not knowing if people are looking at you and not knowing to look at the camera or the person. I think, and that for larger meetings, it's okay for one-to-many presenting, but it's not the greatest for more of an interactive cocktail hour kind of mingling sort of event. So I'm looking forward to when there's something where you could, put some goggles on and then actually move through a crowd and move into small group conversations and then break away and navigate over to, other people having conversation. I think that'll be a real breakthrough. And I don't know if Zoom is working on that, but or if, in your case, the office situation, if you could kind of move through the office, knock on someone's door, they say, yeah, open it up. And then even if it's avatars and not like sort of a realistic representation, being able to move around physically would make it feel very much like you're there, right?
Yeah, it does, exactly. And those informal and unplanned encounters, which happen in a real office, they can still happen in those situations. So we'll definitely get there. It's just a question of when and which technology ultimately.
Beyond these sort of interactive aspects like we're talking about now in terms of online, what are some of the other questions that you've been hearing from your clients about just how companies are organized in terms of either hierarchy or roles or whether people are full-time employees or independent contractors? What sorts of issues do you hear clients struggling with?
Yeah, they're struggling. The questions that clients struggle with are relatively timeless. What's our purpose? What's our strategy? How do we win in the marketplace? How should we be organized? How do we manage talent? But of course, the context around those companies continues to shift. So, and I would say that many organizations are still trying to figure out the model that worked, and many are still not very, what I would call, future ready. So just to get a bit more specific, you asked about how they should be organized. The trend in terms of the work that gets done is very clear. The work we get done is becoming much less routine. It requires much more creativity, us doing things for the first time, figuring out new technologies for the first time. Demand goes up and down, and we're constantly launching new products and services. Innovation is key. So as that context has shifted, that also means that the organizational operating model needs to shift and become equally flexible, adaptive, quick to change. And in practice, the trends or the shifts that we see are that companies need to become flexible, to some extent become on demand, instead of having very rigid boundaries. So I see one big shift that the usage of gig workers or freelance workers will continue to rise. Companies are already doing this, so this is not new. But the proportion of the workforce that becomes freelance will definitely increase. The companies will never go away, but there will be a larger proportion that is on demand, project-based, maybe not full-time, and very project-specific. So that's one big shift I see. And then the other one is definitely a shift just towards more intelligence. And it's a little bit linked to what I just talked about with the on-demand organization. But we're moving towards an economy and an organizational, let's say, ways of working where the skills you have become your currency, not your education per se, not your experience. All that stuff might help, but it ultimately comes down to what are the skills you have and what are the skills the specific project needs. And then we have a skill-based matching platform. Many companies do this internally right now, an internal job market, but that will be, I think, opened up externally as well, so that it'll be much more quicker and intuitive and flexible.
I think you're right. Certainly about companies using more independent professionals. At least I hope so. And you'd expect that to be the case. I'm not a professional economist, but my understanding of the Coase theorem is, the sort of the theory of why companies exist. It's largely related to transaction costs, because it's very expensive to have arm's length transactions with every single, person you interact with. So it's easier and cheaper for companies to make a long-term deal with individuals and say, you become my employee, and then we're not going to have to worry about negotiating every single transaction. But if those transaction costs go down, which they have, it's much easier to onboard someone, get them engaged, plug them into your communications and your email. Then you would expect, since the cost has gone down, the equilibrium will shift.
Yeah, that's spot on. It's that's a foundational theory of transaction costs, and they are definitely coming down. And I like to take that longer term view that by 2030 we know that this is the direction that the world is moving into. We know that technology is becoming better. We know that things like Google Docs and all the things in the cloud make it way easier for us to collaborate asynchronously across the world. So as a company, you have to ask these questions today. You have to figure out, where do I want to go and how quickly?
Yeah, I think
it's not an option just to say I'm going to do what I've always done.
Somewhat self-interested, but I think that every big company really at the C-level needs to be developing what is their strategy for using independent professionals, in what scenarios and so forth, and how to reduce some of the barriers to engaging people. Right now, sometimes the amount of paperwork and hassle is quite extreme, and they put a lot of barriers in place to enabling that. So Nicolai, you're doing incredible stuff. I mean, I'm so impressed with the books and the talks. For folks that wanted to follow up and kind of follow up with you, find out what you're doing, would you like to give a link or point to your website? What's the best way for people to find out what you have going on?
I try to keep all my URLs consistent. So Nicolai CN is my website, nicolaicn.com, or LinkedIn /NicolaiCN, Instagram /NicolaiCN. So that would be the best places to connect, and yeah, follow what I'm up to and some of my thoughts.
Fantastic. Well, we will include those links in the show notes. Nicolai, thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you for having me.